Hello, Iveta. Hello, Vera.
No.
Hello, Lenka.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome all to this sixth and the last one of our seminar meetings devoted to our main topic, metaphors of knowledge in the early modern period, or early modern metaphors of knowledge. As usually, today we will have two speakers and two papers, which are related to Comenius's Labyrinth of the World, and the second one to Pietist metaphors. I will introduce both speakers a little bit later. Maybe you remember, or most of you remember, that we have had already one paper related to the topic of labyrinth, or possibly two papers, because there was one paper by Dalibor Vik related to the metaphor of light in the labyrinth, and the paper by Elizabeth Bloom on Teofilo Folengo and his Caos del Triperuno was also related to some extent to Labyrinth of Mirrors. Today, we will approach the topic of the labyrinth from the different perspective, and there is also an interesting connection between our today's two papers, and this is the subject of conversion, spiritual conversion, which is important both for the Labyrinth of the World and for the Pietist theology and the use of metaphors in Pietist hymns. As usually, our presenters will have each 20 minutes for each presentation, and the discussion about both papers will follow afterwards. So let's start with our first paper today. Our first speaker is Tomáš Havelka from the Institute of Philosophy, Czech Academy of Sciences. He's a colleague of mine from the Department of Comenius Studies and Early Modern Intellectual History. Tomáš studied Czech language and literature at Charles University. He has been working in the Institute of Philosophy and our department since late 1990s, so the second half of the 1990s, and he focuses in his research on Comenius and his Czech works, Czech writings. Tomáš is also editor of the Comenius's Czech works in his in the critical edition of his works in his opera Omnia. he apart from Comenius, Tomáš focuses in his research on such topics as early modern homiletics, the topic of humor in early modern Czech writings, the Baroque literature in general, and he published recently a monograph devoted to the important topic of biblical quotations and biblical allusions used by Comenius in his Czech writings. He approached this topic using modern digital methods, including visualization of quotations and relationships between them. Right now, Tomáš is preparing a new edition of the Labyrinth of the World and Paradise of the Heart, which is based on the manuscript version of this writing. And this is, I believe, also important for his interpretation of the Labyrinth. I should also mention that Tomáš teaches Czech literature, the medieval and early modern literature at the Charles University. So this is just a short introduction. Tomáš will be speaking, as I've already mentioned, on the topic of metaphorical level of Comenius' Labyrinth of the World and Paradise of the Heart. Okay, so screen is yours, Tomáš.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you for participation at this very extraordinary meeting and event as well. My paper will be divided, I think, in three parts, or four, including conclusion. And I must excuse me because I will take approximately 23 minutes. I'm not able to more short my paper. So I will switch to my presentation and let's start. The Labyrinth of the World and the Paradise of the Heart by Comenius is a complex work, allegorically conceived, all of whose in compositional and stylistic regularities are subordinated to this context. It is conceived from the rhetorical point of view as a literary equivalent of the quadriga for a fourth interpretation of the text, especially of its second level, in which allegorical meaning is assigned to real, specifically described phenomena. In the second part, the Paradise of the Heart, this allegorical plan intensifies to become a mystical, homiletically conceived thesis about soteriological premises and security of being in the confusion of the world with the help of the divine presence. The pilgrim's awareness of the created world and its creator is an essential prerequisite. The pilgrim is not without awareness when he enters the city world, but knows how to tell good from evil. When he dons the badly fitting spectacles of illusion in the first part, he knows God and sees the world properly. But how does he know that such a world is correct? It is an archetypal awareness of the book of the mind. Comenius mentions in the preface to the Labyrinth the belief that every man carries within himself the God-given ability to recognize right from wrong. The human being, of course, endowed with innate rational power, aspires all the more to the God and the comfortable. He elaborates this belief in the Centrum Securitatis, written soon of, after or before the Labyrinth, who knows, as third explaining in it the attitude used I feel a reason within myself. I know what, I know why, and I know how. Where does it come from? The firmament gave me the complex, that is, wit and memory, more subtle or more cloudy. This is surely Neoplatonic use of eternal ideas.
Sorry, Tomáš, can you may I interrupt you here just for a second? There is a request from Richard Bloom that it is hard to understand, that there is maybe some problem with the microphone.
Yes, also.
And Vojta Balík is also saying there is a, I can understand, but there is some, it's not echo, but something is, can you try to?
Can you hear an echo? Sorry?
Not echo, but now it's perhaps a slightly better, or can you just
confusing.
Try to mute it and
so is it better?
No.
No. Sorry. So I will stop my presentation and try to adjust my. Is it better? Please, could you tell me? Hello. Is it better?
For me, it's fine, but
Yeah, it's better, definitely.
It's better. Okay.
Can Richard or Vojta say if it's better?
There's something.
Seems to be better now.
Okay, it's better. Yeah.
Okay. So we are stop. Yeah. I feel reason within myself. I know what, I know why, and I know how. Where does it come from? The firmament gave me the complex, that is, wit and memory, more subtle or more cloudy. This is surely Neoplatonic use of eternal ideas. The pilgrim enters the city with an awareness of God's existence and of the harmony of paradise. He goes to compare this archetypal state of the idea with reality. He finds a word where the trace of original harmonic structure is always present. He sees some sort of city of an appearance beautiful and glorious and very broad, that is roundly built, here unambiguously a circle, evoking God's perfect form.
Tomáš, I'm sorry again. It's not good. It's like the volume is changing, and in some sentence it almost disappear, and in other sentence it's good. I don't know what's the problem, but it's some technical problem. I believe.
Oh.
Can you try once again?
I mean know how to solve this problem, because it is for the first time when this appeared. I try to unplug my camera and plug in again. Sorry. Is it better, please? Could you tell me?
Yes.
Okay, I hope it will be solved. Very sorry. The word or the city consists of 6 streets, which are also a perfect fulfillment of the symbolic number of completeness, the numerus perfectus. However, a deposit of human imperfection covers this apparent divine perfection. It is plain that the streets are deliberately spoiled by human activity, in many places as it were intersected. The allegorical and metaphysical construction of the text derives from conflicts between an awareness of the ideal state and the reality. The method by which the pilgrim passes through the city refers to the encyclopedic principle of arranged themes on the model of nomenclatures popular at the time. In this case, the nomenclature of errors and shortages, where criticism is achieved through irony and grotesque caricature, especially of external manifestation. Umberto Eco, amongst others, drew attention to the fact that as early as from the Middle Ages in Ramon Llull, and then in the Mannerist period, the concept emerged of perceiving encyclopedic works as a system that, when it reaches its developed form, is shaped like a tree, whose individual branches grow from one root, and the branches divide into 3 particular categories. Comenius arranged the pilgrim's passage through the city in a very similar way. He mentions the tree in several places in the Labyrinth, on the one hand as a metaphor of nature current at the time, that is natural philosophy. It's surely a description related to the Arbor Scientiae by Ramon Llull, who developed the idea of the Porphyrian tree. Please compare 2 pictures on the left bottom of the screen and pay attention especially on 2 figures under the tree, and you see a very, very close similarity to these 2 pictures of the tree. Comenius himself used this conceptual symbol of the tree in Centrum Securitatis, and this very important similarity between these 2 texts by Comenius. The early modern period encyclopedia gradually moves from the tree to a non-definitive system described as wood or forest, silva, and from here is only a small step to the connection with the labyrinth mentioned in the preface to the Instauratio Magna of Francis Bacon in 1620. The metaphor of the forest, tree, and the labyrinth meaning an encyclopedia then merges exactly at the time when Comenius is beginning to conceive the text of the labyrinth and the paradise, Lusthaus of the heart. Let us follow the path that the pilgrim takes through the city. Although Comenius explicitly describes the labyrinth as a maze, the narration shows a relative.
Now the microphone is completely silent.
Yeah. I can't hear anything.
Can't hear you.
Nothing.
My guess is that the setting of the microphone in your computer is not right.
What? Did you have a micro? Oh.
No, it's not working. I would try to close it, Tomáš, and I do apologize to everybody. I hope Tomáš will be able to fix it. In reasonable time span.
I'm very sorry, but I really have no idea what's happened.
Now it works. Now it works.
Yeah.
At least we can hear you.
Oh, but my presentation worked very bad. Oh my God. Oh, it's wrong. Oh.
Don't worry. Just continue and.
You cannot see some of my pictures. I'm very disappointed.
We see the one with the path through the city now.
Yeah. Let us follow the path that the pilgrim takes through the city. Although Comenius explicitly describes the labyrinth as a maze, the narration shows a really one-way labyrinth. It is the only path that, bending 3 times, moves from the entrance first to where the pilgrim sees the orders of spouses, craftsmen, and scholars. Then he returns across the marketplace and in 3 other categories, streets, regard the estate of the devout, religious, the lords, and the soldiers, then the estate of newsmen somewhere here, and finds himself at the Castle of Fortune. It's a clearly divided, encyclopedically conceived passage by 3 graded categories on the left and 3 on the right. On the one hand, the pilgrim's passage through the city creates of the silhouette of the tree, and on other one-way labyrinth. You cannot see it. I'm sorry. In this context, it is important to be aware of the textological development of the text. The original manuscript version defined the encyclopedic concept much more clearly. The extensive concluding excursion to the Castle of Wisdom or Vanity in particular was not yet written. The first part represented life as a metaphor of the career path from general social levels, wealth and marriage, to being included in the economic system, craftsmen as far as the elite estates, science, and to the summit of supposed prosperity, lords, and ultimate death. The encyclopedic nature of the description is thus much more striking here, without the gradation created by the supplementary closing passage. At the castle of the Queen of Wisdom, the pilgrim passes in order from one station to the next. The activity at the place is first described each time in a different way. Thesis, then rejected, it's antithesis, so he follows the path to the next station, and so on. This interpretative return to the original text is for us essential. The concept of the manuscript was a clear path through the station of knowledge. It was, in fact, a dystopic social encyclopedia, gradually coming to recognize the image of a negative execution of the divine ideal prefiguration.
Again, a problem with the microphone. Sorry. We cannot hear you. Sorry, Tomáš. It's probably necessary to.
Question: If Tomáš is in the same building as Vladimir, can he maybe come to Vladimir's computer?
No, he's not. He's at home.
Sorry.
Tomáš, can you use other computer perhaps? I mean, some laptop or still not working. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so terrible situation. The concept of the manuscript was a clear path through the station of knowledge. It was, in fact, a dystopic social encyclopedia, gradually coming to recognize the image of a negative execution of the divine ideal prefiguration. Comenius is therefore inconsistent, also in the way he deals with the metaphors of things and of instruments, which is why we find such confusion in the relationships between the description of individual things. What concerned him was how a thing was used, not the thing itself. When he looked at it, he saw purely the social aspects. The basic element used to depict the disillusion of the labyrinth is not metaphor, but caricature and grotesque. Comenius uses metaphor only for realia and processes of phenomena which the pilgrim could not encounter in fiction. However, he uses them essentially in a way opposite to the usual procedure on literary theory. If we go back to such classical authorities as Quintilian and Donat and continue through medieval symbolic literature, the aim of the metaphor is to explain some unknown quality or phenomenon, often transcendental, or to clarify or expand human properties, especially with the help of analogies from the world of plants or animals. Comenius, however, does the opposite. He obscures the known realia. For this, he evidently uses one of the properties of the metaphor to which he draws attention in the report and doctrine of preaching, Zpráva a naučení o kazatelství. That is, the ambiguity of interpretation by the use of several levels of connotation, so that apparently sometimes even the reasonable cannot comprehend. The conceptual base for this multivalence and ambiguity are the prerequisite already mentioned. The pilgrim knows the difference between good and evil, but he appears not to know realia, a special human activity. Nevertheless, even in this plan, we find selectivity. This apparent obviousness of known things led Comenius to either being unaware or not reflecting, or was it on the contrary his conscious intention, that very often the pilgrim's paradisal innocence crumbles or loses coherence. There are many such examples. For instance, there was no need for him to explain the clerical degrees. Thought he could do that by simple metaphor, as in case of physicists, students, or astronomers. But how could pilgrim know the functions of bishops, archbishops, abbots, provosts, deans, superintendents, inspectors, and so on? He named them only as those who have their own elders above them, which is such basal simplification that it creates only a cluster of words. If we don't imagine real function behind them, according to our own experience, functions that are in fact relatively distinct from each other. Much more interesting is what the pilgrim doesn't know. These things are actually surprisingly ordinary realia. In chapter 9, where important is that the supplement only in Amsterdam print, The wagoners describe their burden to him as wings. The metaphor is, by the way, twofold. It links their own load to the vision of the profit to be made from its delivery. That means wagoners themselves using incomprehensible metaphorical accentuation by connotation. The pilgrim, however, doesn't even know the wagoner's cart, which is described as lads as with wheels underneath, being loaded with whites and fastened to cattle. No one would be able to imagine a wagon from that if they didn't already know what was being described. In the Amsterdam Sea Journey supplement, the ship is described in a completely amateurish way, only by analogical metaphors like a little cottage, that's mean a cabin, standing on pedestals and pillars. The sailors call the wind metaphorically a dwarfed beast, maybe referring to a horse. Even that has to be connoted in one's mind. A more simple explanation and of more benefit to the pilgrim would simply be that it is the wind. Or perhaps the pilgrim doesn't know and it needs to be explained. Oh no, we immediately read, then the wind will blow. Perhaps it means that even the pilgrim doesn't understand the metaphor. There again, the pilgrim already knows that it is the wind that stretches the sails, but the sailors continually insist on their own metaphors that they harness their ship. There is another passage appearing here which can illustrate the confusion in metaphor recognition even better. Whereas in the preceding example of the description of a wagoner's cart, we see a metaphor that created obscurity. In this one, parts of the ship are described as the reverse of a wagoner's cart, and they showed me among that bridles, ropes, traces, scales, harnesses, shafts, axles, wagons, beams, stakes, and various levers, and so on. It's a real description of a cart, presupposing a very good acquaintanceship with its nomenclature, but using it to obscure the metaphor of the ship. These obscuring metaphors of the labyrinth, I believe, including the confusion of the author himself, are conceived to portray the confused, dystopic reality of a destitute world. The use of metaphor in Lusthaus' Paradise is very different. When the pilgrim reaches the center of the labyrinth and experiences the initial opening of his mind, the new metaphor appeared is the heart. He finds himself in a special transcendent space of his own heart chamber. The metaphor is spiritual through and through, and therefore everything is suddenly filled with symbolic objects not having material connotations. The work with metaphor is reversed. No, it finally becomes a standard explanatory instrument which, with the help of comprehensible material denotation, refer to ideal abstraction. The very first chapter is full of such images: damaged ladders, plucked wings, broken cloaks, and so on. They are still metaphors of disorder and chaos, but already quietly anticipating their remedy. These standard metaphors now show a number of links to contemporary soteriological literature that incidentally correspond tellingly to the emblems in book very broadly popular at the time, Cor Jesu Amanti Sacrum, first published in 1586. The connection of the content of this emblematic book describing the conversion of the spirit in the same way as Comenius in the Lusthaus Paradise of the Heart is remarkable. The process of the narrative engravings contains three phases of the conversion of the human heart: cleansing, purgatio, enlightenment, illuminatio, and unification, unitatis. You can see Christ knocking on the door. Christ sweeps away disorder from the heart. Christ carries a ladder or broken clothes and the divine light of corrections. Christ, who is also received by Comenius pilgrim as a guest, this is a clear biblical allusion to Revelation 3, shares with him information about the relationship to the world after conversion. It is information that leads him transformed in his mind back along the path of the labyrinth. A metaphorical and symbolic fulfillment of the conversion is the replacement of profane symbols by sacred that leads to the shaping of parallel pairs. The pilgrim especially receives new spectacles and a bridle. Both are again purely metaphorical. They are not found on the head of the pilgrim, but rather in his mind, symbols of a new awareness. Only now does the metaphor of the labyrinth receive its true and final fulfillment. No other path can lead out of the center of the one-way labyrinth than that which the pilgrim took to reach the center. It is interesting to ask where the whole conversion took place. The pilgrim didn't leave the city. He found himself outside it only spiritually, in his head. So now, understandably, it's as in a mirror, he looks at the recognizable, spoiled, destitute world, which he discovered once, but now he sees it in its original archetypal purity. His awareness, influenced now by the spectacles of the Word of God and the Holy Spirit, thanks to his own resignation, may I be nothing, that you shall be all, now sees the city world as a harmony. Christ shows him verbally the replacement of spoiled phenomena by ones that are remedied. Conclusion. We have been interpreting Comenius' Labyrinth of the World surprisingly as an encyclopedic journey through a one-way labyrinth, although Comenius himself speaks of the labyrinth as a maze. The metaphorical level conveys a number of remarkable inconsistencies which indicate that Comenius made use of its potential as a good and purposeful element of satire and comedy of a damaged work, but that was not his chief plan. We recognized that the text represents a three-part composition. The first part, the passage through the city, is a metaphorical, mystical way of casting away the external profane attributes of being, until the novice pilgrims matures to the state of the dark night, that of St. John the Cross, and thus to the crucial mystical level where he loses all the apparent securities of the profane world. It is a time of trial to find out how firm his resolution is. Nowhere is it said that the pilgrim has reached the center of the labyrinth, but the darkness of the moment and the depth of his doubt show that he has reached the final state of resignation, the central point. It is a place where he meets with himself at the same time. It is where he finds Christ waiting, knocking on the door of the novice spiritual center. That is his heart. That is a separate part of the whole tract, usually unmentioned, the center of the labyrinth. The third and final part is the journey back out of the labyrinth. It comprises the phases of cleansing, illuminating, and unifying, which correspond with the mystical part of the devout soul to God, mentioned in various descriptions of the spiritual experience. The enlightened novice of divine love sees the originally disharmonious world in its original archetypal purity. The path through the labyrinth thus closes and makes up a circle. At the beginning, the pilgrim set out of his own accord. No, he has returned, and at home he closes himself in his heart, sitting with the one Lord God. Mystical ecstasy has turned into awakening. The use of metaphor corresponds to the allegoric plan, while in his passage through the profane labyrinth of the city it is more about the grotesque, distort, ironic and blurring procedures, and the obscuring metaphorization of the known and real phenomena make it difficult to recognize them at all. In the Lusthaus paradise of the head, they are replaced by ordinarily used explanatory metaphors by means of which Comenius describes transcendent and mystical phenomena with the help of analogies with real phenomena to come closer to purely abstract experiences. Thus, in all the parts, metaphors serve as a significant, albeit auxiliary element. In Lusthaus paradise of the head, however, they gain a much more constitutive and considerable status. Thank you very much for your attentions and tolerance.
Thank you, Tomáš, so much. I think we will have discussion afterwards to this quite original, I must say, interpretation of the labyrinth. The three-part structure is not so often mentioned, usually two-part structure, of course. And thank you so much for your struggle with technical problems. It is a bit paradoxical because Tomáš is the person who so perfectly recorded all our previous seminars, was responsible for streaming them, etc., and finally during his own presentation this technical background failed. So I'm sorry, but the second part was already very good, and the microphone worked perfectly. So I hope all the participants had the correct understanding of the whole of the paper. Let me introduce our second speaker today, Anna Szyrwińska-Hörig from the University of Vechta. Anna studied philosophy in Warsaw and Constance. She worked for several years, or was attached for several years, to the Martin Luther University at Halle-Wittenberg, originally as a member of the Graduiertenkolleg, devoted to the topic of the Enlightenment, religion, and knowledge. Then she continued as a member of the Seminar for Philosophy of the same university, and since 2015 she teaches philosophy at the University of Vechta. Anna published widely on the topic of Pietism, Pietist theology, but also originally she wrote, or she devoted her studies to the ethics of Immanuel Kant and the relationships between Pietism and Kant. In 2017, she published her monograph based on her dissertation, I believe, Wiedergeborene Freiheit, der Einfluss des Pietismus auf die Ethik Kants. And she also published a number of studies dealing both with Kant and the Pietist influences on him, but also the reception of Kant's philosophy in the context of Polish philosophy, the school of Lwów and Warsaw School. And more recently, she dealt with the problem of objectivity in legal interpretations, the relationship between philosophy or philosophical theory and legal practice. She has been also working on editing Philipp Jakob Spener's works, and previously on Polish translations of Immanuel Kant. So this is a brief summary, and today Anna is going to give us a paper on the topic called Explaining the Meaning of the Inexpressible, Pietist Metaphors Concerning the Phenomenon of the Renewal or Wiedergeburt. Anna, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction and most of all for inviting me here. I think it was already announced that I'll be talking about the metaphors used by Pietists to describe the phenomenon of the so-called Wiedergeburt or renewal. But first, I would like to start with some methodological remarks. First, I wanted to stress I'll be talking about this matter from the point of view of philosophy. Well, it could be also analyzed in context of linguistic or theology, etc. So I will be explicitly focused on philosophic dimension. And second, I just wanted to mention that the analysis of those metaphors does not play a central role in the investigation of Pietist notion of renewal. So it sheds some interesting light on the analysis of systematic theological writings, but it could be treated as a kind of additional tool to learn something about the renewal. And my today presentation will be divided in 3 parts. First, I will explain how I define the term pietism and what is actually this pietist idea of the renewal. Then I will characterize what was so special in pietist usage of language and yes, most of all in the usage of metaphors. And in the end, I hope I'll have some time, I will present some final remarks concerning pietist anthropology and that all in the context of reflection on enlightenment. So I would like to start with this question: what was pietism? And there's a good reason of why I said I would like to present of what I think pietism is, how I do define this term, because as far as I know, there is no official definition of pietism that would be accepted by everybody. So of course, it doesn't mean that we don't know anything about pietism. There were some very interesting contributions to say something in general about it, but as far as I know, there is no classical definition of this movement. For example, according to Johannes Wallmann, he's one of the most prominent experts in this field, pietism means something like a renewal movement in the Occidental Protestantism, which emerged in the 17th century and was the most significant religious movement in the Protestantism since the Reformation, next to the Anglo-Saxon Puritanism. And now I will show you, can wait a moment, I try to share with you. Can you see my presentation? Is it visible? I hope so.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so this is this definition by Wallmann. I have quoted it in original, but here you can see this is quite an accurate characterization. However, actually, it does not reveal much about this dogmatic basis of pietism. So. If we're interested in philosophy, it doesn't bring us much. As far as I know, modern pietist studies, they are also rather focused on the analysis of some empirical appearances of what was pietism, and they are talking about things just like charity, pietist models of education, etc. But as I said, it is not relevant in philosophic context. So what we need to do is to start with the question how pietism can be defined. As genus proximum, we can acknowledge the fact that it was a Protestant religious movement that emerged in the 17th century, and that's basically of what Wallmann was saying. But my thesis here is that there's one feature of pietism which can be treated as its differentia specifica. And this is the special interpretation of the biblical idea of renewal, or this Wiedergeburt. And now, what does it mean? In the Gospel of John, we can find a dialogue between Jesus and Nicodemus. And here you have the passage from the Bible, but maybe we can remember Jesus was explaining this idea and saying that very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again or born from above. Then Nicodemus is surprised and he asks, how come? How come can you be born again? Jesus replied that, well, flesh gives birth to flesh, but spirit gives birth to spirit. So renewal, Wiedergeburt, is exactly this being reborn or being born from above. Now, what does it mean? It's still a metaphor. Pietists adopted a very specific understanding of this concept. First, they assumed that the renewal was a radical internal revolution in both cognitive and motivational constitution of an individual. And second, they were convinced that such revolution can factually take place in real life of the individual. Those pietists I would like to talk about today were Lutherans. And according to Lutheran theology, it was very strongly emphasized how the human nature was corrupted due to the original sin. The man in the state of corrupted nature, the so-called status naturae lapsa, so those who were not reborn yet, were not able to recognize the moral goodness of actions corresponding with the contents of God's commandments. Their nature was corrupted, which means that both their rational abilities and their volition were negatively influenced. Neither they could understand why does it make sense to follow God's instructions, nor they could find any satisfaction in following them. So not being able to fully control those desires or natural biological desires, and without understanding of this real sense of following God's law, those unreborn individuals could find pleasure only in sin and not in fulfilling God's commandments, those moral obligations. Here, this passage above that you can see, this is the description of the situation of unreborn people presented by Philipp Jakob Spener, the father of Pietism, one of the most prominent representatives of this movement. Pietists believed that this condition of corrupted individuals could completely change due to the renewal. The renewal was supposed to take place thanks to God's grace. So people actually couldn't do anything to get reborn. That was all God's job. Pietists assumed that the results of the renewal were overwhelming. There took place a literal revolution within the cognitive and volitional structures of a person. First, the reborn individual gained ability to identify morally right actions correctly. And second, it developed an internal motivation to perform them voluntarily without experiencing any pressure, any kind of inconvenience due to the contradiction between its personal desires and the content of God's commandments. After correct recognition of what should be done from the point of view of God's law, the reborn individual developed a true will of following God's commandments. So the situation of a reborn individual differed that much from the situation of a person in this state of corrupted nature that Pietists called the state of a reborn person a state of a new man. So here, the passage below, it's again Spener, he makes a differentiation or confrontation between those two stages. As already mentioned, Pietists were convinced that the renewal was not only a theoretical concept found somewhere in the Bible, but it could be also experienced in reality. So renewal was understood as something that can factually occur, that could really take place anytime during the life of an individual. Thus, Pietists made really their best to try to organize their life in a way that would somehow help them to prove God that they were ready to be sent the grace of being reborn. And as one may see, exactly this point, exactly this differentiation between these two kinds of human condition before and after the renewal makes the Pietist theology quite interesting from the point of view of philosophy, because one has to do with two different models of moral motivation. Before the renewal, this is the externalist model of motivation, and after the renewal, it's the internalist one. Moreover, but it's something that I just want to mention it. Maybe in September I can say something more about it. Moreover, it can be shown that Pietists believed that the reborn individuals had free will in the radical indeterministic sense. Such understanding of renewal had very significant consequences for the language used by Pietists. Pietists needed to develop some rhetorical devices that would allow them to inform as many believers as possible about a chance to get reborn, and at the same time they needed to do it in a possibly simple way, because they wanted to reach everybody and not only those who had some, I would say, academic background. So it was for them even very, very important to teach children so that they can get prepared to be reborn from the very beginning. And that is the reason of why Pietists adopted specific theological discourses. It is characteristic that they made the attempt to make theological language useful for pragmatic reasons. They used examples from everyday life. They described feelings and emotions of some individuals acting. They presented some concrete discussions of what to do, how to react in different situations. So that was the difference between Protestant orthodoxy, that was very sophisticated. It was their paradigms were very, very exclusive, and here Pietist language should be understandable for everybody. Especially the usage of metaphors seems to be a very useful tool to achieve the goal, to inform people about such sophisticated theological matters, because metaphors, yes, they can relate to the sophisticated matters, but at the same time, they don't have to be explained, as they bring about some very spontaneous and intuitive connotations. So it's a huge advantage of metaphors that they don't have to be clarified, because they operate with those very natural intuitions. So metaphors seem to be a perfect linguistic tool to describe the phenomenon of the renewal, which is a kind of mystery, and thus it is actually not expressible. Here one may recognize another point which is interesting from the point of view of philosophy, namely the affinity between this linguistic situation in Pietism and the theories presented in analytic philosophy. For example, theory presented by Donald Davidson in his article "What Metaphors Mean." So Davidson was saying that metaphors were something like a dream work of language, and he emphasized that metaphors were not about the meaning of single terms, but rather about what do they do with the interpreters? What effect do they bring about? So this is another very interesting point, philosophic point in Pietism. And now, after this theoretical part, I would like to present a short systematics of metaphors I have found in a Pietist anthology of hymns, released by Johann Anastasius Freilinghausen. I have chosen his work, Geistreiches Gesangbuch, as actually it's a very prominent example of a Pietist hymnal, and at the same time it's a great source of metaphors. But I would not like to present any longer quotations today, as I think it is yes, it's much more relevant for us today to focus on kinds of metaphors and of classes of metaphors. So first, one can observe that the metaphors in hymns relate always to the situation before and after the renewal. Mostly the metaphors illustrate here the following oppositions that you can see. It's sickness, health, death, life, sleeping, being awake, darkness, light, hiddeness, and visibility. And second, the goal of using the metaphors was to show different aspects of the phenomenon of renewal. I have differentiated 3 of them, but maybe there are some more. So I would say it's still an open question. The first aspect is the idea of the renewal understood as an improvement of an abnormal condition. It relates to the opposition between the state of a corrupted nature and the condition of a new man, which occurs after the renewal. Metaphors used in this context are those which refer to those opposition between sickness, health, life, death, and sleeping and being awake. So those metaphors demonstrate the corruption of human nature resulting from the original sin as a kind of pathology, a sickness, which can be overcome only by the renewal. The human condition before renewal was understood not as a standard and neutral point for any improvement, but rather as some very dangerous abnormal pathologic situation that should be changed as fast as possible. So it's not that it's good, but it can be better. It's not good, rather, but it can be better. The terms used to show these aspects were, for example, sickness, wounds, pain, medicine, relief, life, ointment. So these are those medical terms. Next to metaphors illustrating these aspects of health and sickness, or life and death, which is connected with health and sickness, this pathology, this abnormality of the state of corruption was also shown by metaphors relating to sleeping and being awake. And here sleep represents a kind of existence which is not conscious or not fully conscious, and thus it is not complete, it's not perfect. It's a kind of vegetation. So we can say for creatures that were created on God's image, it seems not to be very suitable only to vegetate. Sleeping individual does not have any actual access to the reality because, well, it's just dreaming. So we can say that the whole cognition refers to something unreal, this dimension of dreams. So it's not reality. Sleep is connected with falseness. So sleep is bad and one should wake up as fast as possible. The next aspect is the idea of the renewal of the volition. I have already mentioned that due to Pietist understanding, the renewal decreased the tension between some individual desires of a person and the content of what God says, God's commandments. So there's a set of metaphors which had a goal to present to show that after the renewal, this following God's commandments was not being experienced as a burden anymore, but as a kind of pleasure. It was a very positive experience. So we can say after the renewal, it feels good to do of what God would like us to do. So here we observe how this externalist model of motivation turns into the internalist one. the metaphors, well, I've got only some examples. The metaphors relating to this condition were something like being absorbed in God or living in God's name. So it's all focused on this very pleasant state of being united with God, being close to Him. And the last aspect of the renewal, that was the idea of the renewal of cognitive and rational abilities. Renewal caused an improvement of individuals' rational abilities. The reborn individual begins to recognize correctly what is a proper action and to understand the sense of following God's commandments. So in order to show that, mostly there were used metaphors relating to the idea of light, just like the sun, shining light, clarity, lighting through or glowing brightness, lighten up the senses. In the light, everything seems to be more visible, everything seems to be clear. So the risk of overlooking anything, making any mistake is quite low. And we can say that similarly, due to this improved quality, cognitive and rational qualities of reborn individuals, reborn individuals were also able to register many factors, many informations that were important for the proper moral consideration and moral planning of what to do. So those individuals who have not experienced the renewal yet, they did not have complete view of the situation. And according to that, they just couldn't act in a proper way. Here I have presented again, this is a little bit longer text, as one of the hymns that we can find in Freilinghaus's hymnal. Here in this text, you will find how many aspects are connected. So here you will find light, you will find shadows. So I just wanted to show it to you. I'm not going to analyze the text because it would just take a lot too much time. And now finally, I would like to proceed to the last point and share some observation concerning the idea of renewal in the context of reflection on enlightenment. So as mentioned, Pietist's idea of renewal had overwhelming and very radical character. Due to the analysis of metaphors, it is to see that the metaphors relate to oppositions between which there are no middle degrees. So they accentuate very radical difference between this old man and the new man. So for example, I am going back. You can see sickness and health, death and life. We cannot be alive and deaf at the same time. We cannot be sick and healthy at the same time. Sleeping and being awake, darkness and light, it's excluding. And this observation has got a fundamental meaning for the proper qualification of Pietist renewal concept. Because as it said, renewal was a literal revolution in the cognitive and volitional structures of an individual. So we can say that when those changes are so radical and when there's nothing in between, then it is to assume that there are only two classes of individuals existing. There are new men and old men, and nothing in between. So we can say that the renewal completely cuts off an individual from the past. And well, now it's getting quite interesting because it seems that this conception that we've got two different classes of individuals is completely opposite to the enlightened vision of humanity, which is based on the assumption of the universality of reason. It was one of the features of enlightenment that, well, enlightened thinkers were convinced that every rational subject was rational in exactly the same way as other rational subjects. So all the factors that could differentiate individuals, sex, age, educational, social status, it does not play any role when it comes to the capability of making use of someone's reason The process of reasonings runs in each case in exactly the same way, and this is the factor that allows the enlightened thinkers to be very optimistic concerning the exchange of information and building a system of knowledge. So, as one may see, there's a crucial difference between the enlightened paradigm concerning human rationality and Pietist vision of rationality. According to the enlightened paradigm, there existed a unity of reason, whereas according to the Pietist understanding, there were two grades of rationality characterizing two classes of individuals. So the first kind characterized the unreborn individuals, and it was not complete. The second one characterized the reborn individuals, and that was, so to say, perfect. And this observation sheds, I guess, a new light on the position of Pietism within the constellation of enlightened paradigms, because it turns out to be quite problematic to assume that Pietist anthropology fits to this enlightened anthropological vision. At the same time, it is really hard to deny that Pietism played a quite important role for the development of enlightenment, especially in Germany. So I guess that in regard to these observations, now it is legitimate to ask whether Pietism can be really acknowledged as an element of this constellation, can be situated in the constellation of enlightened intellectual spiritual movements, or maybe the enlightened understanding of reason should be somehow reformulated, and it turns out to be much more complex as we used to think. This is the aspect that would not be visible without the analysis of metaphors, and that's the reason of why I guess that metaphors play a very important role exactly in this kind of investigation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this extremely interesting and rich paper, which discussed not only the topic of the metaphors and the usage of metaphors in relationship to the concept of renewal, but also these broader issues of relationship of Pietism to enlightenment in general, which is of course a complex and fascinating topic of itself. So thanks to both today's speakers. I would like to open the discussion now. Your questions, comments, remarks. You can, of course, as usually, you can use either the yellow hand on or write to the chat, or I'll try to follow you also on the screen if you use not the yellow hand, but your real hand. If there are no questions yet, I try to.
Veronika Chapskova is raising.
Okay, there appeared two questions. So first Tomáš and then Lucia.
Okay, I have no question, but just one remark on my own presentation. As you can see, not only my microphone, but also my presentation fault. So I want to ask you if I can show you my two wrongly appeared presentation slides.
Can we do that after, or perhaps after several questions? Can we start the discussion first and then return to your images?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lucia? Your microphone is muted.
I'm so sorry, I muted it already. Maybe Veronika was the first one who wanted to ask, and maybe we have like a similar question. Let's wait. So thank you so much for both papers. It was really, really inspiring. And I would have one question to Anna. I'm not sure. I can remember like 10 years ago, I read an article by an author whose name was like Aaron Spencer, maybe, or something like that. This was in the Historical Anthropology journal, and it was about metaphors used by Pietists, but in other genres than you chose. And I just have a feeling that he said that they very often used some sort of bodily metaphors, not just a renewal but things like reborn, let's say. So it was a lot about bearing new people, like bearing kids. It was partly obstetrical discourse, the midwife discourse, let's say, or something like that. And I would be interested in whether you came across the same thing in your hymnals, or this is not the case.
Thank you for the question. So actually, in this hymnal by Freilighausen, I haven't found anything that would be that connected with this biological dimension. But I think it's something that it doesn't actually fit to this convention. But it's true. So I think that there were many pietists who try to explain as exactly as possible what can that be, because it's really hard to explain this phenomenon of the renewal. So they were trying different methods, and it is quite common to compare the renewal, spiritual renewal, with the physiological birth, because we can say, well, an individual is completely passive in this context, just like a baby being born cannot do anything about it. So it's like it's just getting born. Yes, so the things is just happening. So it is exactly the same in the case of spiritual renewal. We are just getting reborn, and well, we don't do anything. We stay passive at the moment. So I guess that this kind of comparison, it is quite common. But I am sorry, I cannot give any examples from this hymnal book by Freilighausen.
Yeah, I just said to myself that maybe the very fact of being so passive, in the whole act, maybe doesn't fit to your argument about the new rationality, or I'm not sure.
I would say it's well, that's the problem, that if we want to talk about it in the systematic way, that actually we are quite helpless, because well, we do not have the proper ways of expressions. So yes, even if we are talking about it and we are comparing it to this physiological being born, then it's still a kind of comparison. Well, I would say that renewal, it's a moment, and then after that you just open your eyes and you see the world in completely different categories. That would be something that is implied by those Pietist writings. And of course, it's like everybody could experience it in some different way. So we've got also different descriptions of what it was. But yes, I would say it's just a moment, and you are a new man. Your constitution is somehow different. So from that point of view, you haven't done anything. The only thing that you could do is to show, yes, please God, send me your grace of being reborn, and then ta-da. But yes, I guess that there are really many relations on how can one feel during that. So yes, I wouldn't say that it excludes this aspect of enhancement of rationality.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really loved your paper. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Now Veronica, and then Richard or Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you, Tomáš and Anna, for your inspiring talks. I find especially Anna's talk very inspiring. I can see some interesting parallels as you talked about explaining the inexpressible and about renewal. I would hypothesize that Pietist renewal probably can be described as a rite of passage. And as I work on sermons over convent entry, I can see some interesting parallels, because God's calling or God's vocation has been often perceived as something difficult to capture, something inexpressible that is expressed through a metaphor, and no one knows what it means. But historical actors insisted that they have heard God's voice and God's calling, and it is in fact, to enter a convent is a rite of passage. It is passing to a new stage of life and to a new phase of spiritual life. But what I find interesting, that it's almost the opposite to what Anna has described. So it's not a passage from life, from death to life, or from hiddenness to visibility, but it's in fact a passage from life to death. So to enter a convent is described as a burial. The nuns are expected to bury their desires and to be hidden rather than visible. So my question actually is that if you also see the Pietist renewal as a rite of passage, and if what I find interesting is that this is a parallel across confessional borders, so between Protestant and Catholic environment. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I understand correctly, it was about how, is it correct to compare Pietist renewal with a kind of passage? I would say yes, but that would really depend on who is talking about it, because passage is also a kind of metaphor. So I would say yes, but what I also think interesting is indeed, so this interpretation of renewal is not only typical for Pietists. We can find also in Reformed theology some examples of quite similar talking about renewal, I guess in Arminianism. So I think that's the phenomenon that that emerges just from time to time on different confessions. But I think that when you go back to the conception of passage, I was thinking about, because when you pass, you can pass, but you can also go back. I think it is maybe interesting to mention that there is no coherency concerning the answer to the question if renewal can be something that you can lose. So according to some of the Pietists, it is still possible to go back to this previous stage, to lose this grace of being reborn. Now it's another story. How does it happen? So it is. I don't want to start talking about it because it would get too complicated. But well, some Pietists, for example, Spener, he would say, yes, we can lose this grace, but there were some who thought after that you got reborn, well, there's only way to heaven. So it's like the radicality, and I would say this factor of how stable this state of new man was. That was another aspect, and I think it is also related with this this idea of passing through. I guess that would be something fitting to your comment too.
Yes, thank you, Anna. I also have a question for Tomáš, but I can wait to give the floor to others as well.
Okay, thank you. So now Richard.
Hello. Yeah, my question is also for Tomáš Havelka. Honestly speaking, I was confused with this distinction, or the two kinds of metaphorization, the obscuring, I'm sorry, the obscuring metaphorization versus the explanatory metaphorization. I hope you understand that I am confused with that. Could you perhaps repeat that and make it understandable for me?
So, if I understand clearly, you ask me on the obscured metaphor of the first passage of Labyrinth and the walk through the city. Yeah, I think Comenius initially used a very obscure metaphor which reversed form of denotation and connotation, how to illustrate a dystopic world, which very often use polymorphal and polyvalential using of metaphors. For example, when he describes the Bible, a very well-known tool of religious thinking, he describes it as lapis lazuli, when someone who wants to try his thinking, he try to compare his thinking with this lapis lazuli, and so on and so on. He uses a lot of symbolic characters, how to describe a baptization, and so on. But very important is that these obscured metaphors has at least two levels. The one level, very important, is located on the margins, where a description of every metaphor is explained. So in this place, for example, he uses description of the Bible as it is, as such it, and very oftenly Comenius loses his coherence, as I try to describe. For example, in this case of the Bible, where the explicit name of the Bible is located in the margin, and metaphoric description is located in the its own text. But after few sentences or few paragraphs, he used in the main text just a single word Bible. So it is, as I described, the losing of coherence of the metaphorical layer, you know. So I think if it is what you asked me, or do you want to explain it more extensively?
Yeah, well, in other contexts, we had metaphors used used to explain something that cannot be explained in rational terms, whereas you seem to detect in Comenius passages where he obscures instead of making it understandable. Mm-hmm. That is for a naive reader, and I haven't read the text, surprising.
Sorry, I didn't understand exactly now. What about the obscure metaphor you surprised?
May I have a, well, this surprised me as well, actually. May I have a comment in the following this line, this question of Richard, and perhaps offer Tomáš a possible interpretation or explanation or whatever. I believe Tomáš nicely showed in his paper that that it is in fact a intentional use of a sort of, or diverted use of metaphors in order, and this is the traditional explanation, in order to achieve a sort of grotesque or perhaps carnivalesque effect, okay, as a textual textual means.
Yes,
and just let me continue. And at the same time, it can illustrate the idea of distorted language, the radical difference between res and verba, which includes wrong understanding of metaphors themselves and wrong usage of metaphors. And when I was reading Tomáš's contribution and listening to it, it appeared in my mind a possible interpretation, which is not in Tomáš's text, but it follows certain logic of that text, and I would like to formulate it somehow. It seems to me that as if the pilgrim, the character of the pilgrim, were a biblical Adam, that is the first Adam, of course, trying to find the meaning of the world by the use of autopsia, okay? But a corrupted autopsia, because he appears in a world, a very complicated and complex one, and he cannot use the autopsia he used in paradise. And this happens before experiencing a mystical conversion and becoming the reborn Adam. So the second Adam, of course, not Christ himself, but somebody following, the follower of the Christ. Okay, so this is the possible sort of interpretation, which I'm asking Tomáš if this is in the line with his understanding of the text. It is not a question, it's just a comment, it's just possible explanation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vladimir, for this explanation. I didn't understand Richard very well because I didn't mention that it is unclear. Very important passage of the Labyrinth is the very beginning of the text, when he describes the pilgrim. And pilgrim is described as when the man take a knowledge of things of good and wrong, he enter the city. So this is the archetypal view of the world as it should be in archetypal Adamic form or something else. But he isn't an innocent Adam because he knows a lot of things. He knows animals. He can use metaphors of animals' transformation, for example, dog's head and wolves, sparkles, and so on. But he doesn't know social processes and social states and so on. And he goes through the city and compares his own, so let's say, Adamic knowledge with the real world, and find some of these things correct with the spectacles on the head, and some wrong if the spectacles are badly fitted. So its difference makes the tension between knowledge of pilgrim and real view of the world. And that's the principle which uses Comenius as a description of the dystopic world. So some processes are clear for pilgrim if he is able to compare it with the innocent point of view, but some of them are absolutely corrupted and caricatured, as Vladimir said, as carnival or upside down world. Yes. And when he reaches the center of the labyrinth and meet the Christ, he will become purgative and illuminated novice who knows every in accordance to God's creation as a really reborn Adam, as Vladimir said.
Okay, there are another question by Iveta Leitane.
Yes, question to Anna. If dichotomies are so radical and the conversion is not irreversible, then how is progress possible? It might happen that this correction occurs again, return to a corrupt state, so to say. And is the second conversion better than the first? Is it just a second copy, kind of oscillation between extreme poles? In that case, the idea of cognitive progress you speak about is quite limited.
Yes, thank you. So maybe I will start with the second question concerning the second conversion. I must say, I don't know. So everything that I have found concerning, I wouldn't say conversion, because it's not something like a conversion in a sense that, well, we decide to convert, I don't know, to be Christians or something. I would stay by this term renewal. What I have found concerning this, the possibility to lose this grace of being reborn is just a signalization that it may happen, and it is indeed happening. So I don't know if there would be any kind of difference between this second renewal. I guess not, because if we really assume that the renewal is a quality itself, then actually we should it would imply that the results of it would be the same as by the first time. But as I said, I haven't found anything concerning these matters. What I have found was just a kind of announcement that it may be reversible, but it's not in every Pietist theory. So as I said, there are some who would say, well, it may be possible to yes, to lose this grace, and there are some who would say no, because those who are reborn, they only want to do of what is so good that actually they don't have the opportunity to step back to this proper stage. Now concerning the idea of progress, I guess that that would be everything connected with the very basic idea for Pietism, which is the attempt to establish God's kingdom here here on the world. Pietism started with oh, actually it didn't start it with this this matter, but one of the factors that contributed to the establishment of Pietism was the releasing of Pia Desideria by Philip Jakob Spener. That was his kind of Pietist postulate, and it's, for example, Spener's idea that we should try to live the life the way we would live it in heaven. Pietists also had a very strong conviction, as far as I know, concerning the apocalypse coming. So actually they also, we can find such indications that some of them thought, well, these are actually the last years we can live here, and now well, apocalypse is going to occur. So it's well, this striving for renewal that should help us to bring us nearer to God, and yes, actually there's that would be the progress. But I am not sure if I have answered this concrete question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there was another question from Veronica for Tomáš, and I do have some questions for Anna as well. So first, Veronica, please.
Yes, I have a question for Tomáš. Thank you, Tomáš, for your paper. I'm not sure if I got or understood everything because it was a bit interrupted, but I find it very intriguing that you talked about dystopia and disorder. So my question is if you could elaborate a bit more on the aspects of dystopia and disorder in Comenius's Labyrinth, and how possibly how dystopia and disorder are related, if you can. Thank you.
Okay, as I said on the very first part of my paper, I tried, before my microphone corrupted, description of the world, how pilgrim view from the top of the tower. It's very important because he can see the world in pseudo-harmonic form, as a circle form with enlightened from above. So it looks like a harmonic form of the world, it means a city. And everything looks in accordance to his knowledge of God's proceedings and a similar way. So in this case, the general view on the city looks like a utopia, like a utopia. But when he enters into the city, he conceives a lot of differences between this utopic point of view on the world and reality. So as is very broadly known, is caused by the spectacles on his head. I must make one remark to these spectacles. As I said on the second part of my paper, these spectacles or glasses are absolutely metaphorical. So it is located just in the mind. It's not a material tool. It's just ideal tool or something else. But very important to make his capability to interpret the world around him. So this second point of view on the world is dystopic. So world turned upside down. Everything what should have God's point of view has a human point of view, and a lot of differences are caused by human intervention. So the classical number 6 of the number of the street are corrupted by human intervention, and some borders are broken, and so on, so on. So this is the dystopic world, which may correspond to some other broadly known literal adaptation, for example, by Matěj Konečný and other authors of this time, which who describes the world before final collapse. I think it's very, very close to apocalyptical point of view, which Comenius in this time in the early 20s start to conceive. So if I can...
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, I'm not sure if Iveta has another question or... Or this is just the hand which remained on the screen,
no,
perhaps.
The answer was fine. Was illuminating, yes.
No more question. Okay. I have two questions to Anna, actually. One is related to your fascinating analysis of the improvement of cognitive abilities according to Pietists by this very moment of renewal. And you mentioned this improvement of cognitive abilities causes primarily recognition of the moral obligations of the individuals, the recognition of the ethical values, etc., and the God's law. But my question is whether I do understand that this is related to your chosen literary genre, to the hymns, to the spiritual songs. But is there any discussion in the Pietist works of whether this improvement of cognitive abilities has also impact on better understanding of metaphysical or natural philosophical questions, not only the ethical issues, but also metaphysical or natural philosophical? My second question relates to this very genre, because when you discussed these metaphors typical for the Pietists, like sickness, health, death, life, sleeping, being awake, darkness, light, etc., etc. I was just thinking whether these are quite traditional metaphors, aren't they? They are not so much innovative, or the usage of the metaphors themselves, I mean. So I was just thinking, how much are these metaphors typical for the genre of spiritual songs in general? You know, I understand that the meaning, which is very specific for the Pietists, is different. But to what extent these metaphors were unique within the genre, or in other words, does this specific metaphorical vocabulary well, sorry, I lost the or in other words, are these metaphors used in other contexts of the genre of spiritual songs? For example, in the context of mainstream Lutheranism, I mean, in the context of, let's say, 16th century Lutheran hymns, to what extent this differed from what was used by the Pietists in the late 18th century? In other words, do Pietists use certain tradition that was already there in the Lutheran context, but just put a different meaning to this tradition, or to these specific usage of metaphors? Yeah, that's the second question. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will start with the second question again.
Okay.
It is. It's true. It's true. So it is indeed those metaphors that I have mentioned. They are not typically Pietist metaphors. We can find them everywhere. What is so special in this hymn book by Frelinghuysen is he has chosen different hymns. Not every hymn was written by adherents of Pietism, so we can find also older texts. But So and also not all the hymns are focused on this conception of the renewal. So we will find something more in this hymnal. But what is interesting is maybe I'm going to make one remark more. I wanted to remind of what I said at the beginning, that is analysis of metaphors is a kind of additional tool to learn something about Pietist understanding of renewal in general. So I would say in the analysis of metaphors from the hymnal, we can find a proof that our analysis of systematic theological writings presented by Pietist thinkers is correct. I would say it is interesting that in this hymnal by Frelinghuysen, this concept of the renewal is quite present. So it's something that I would say. There were other things important for the Pietists, just like charity or missions, but we don't find anything concerning charity or missions. So I guess that even if Frelinghuysen didn't wrote everything by himself, even if those hymns contained in this book are all written by Pietists, even if some of them are much older, they were chosen according to some special content. So I would say it's not the content itself what is interesting, but it's rather the criteria Frelinghuysen used when he decided what hymns should be contained and what not. So I guess that could be acknowledged as a kind of confirmation that renewal was indeed quite important. But well, Pietists were just Lutherans, so I just also wouldn't, I wouldn't differentiate that much. I guess that Pietist, that was just a stage of the development of Lutheranism. It was special for Pietists that they indeed have this extraordinary understanding of the renewal, but yes, it is still possible to say in some confessional writings, this form of concord, for example, we will also find informations concerning the renewal. So from that point of view, it was not typically Pietist. I don't know if I have answered this first, the second question, or is it still?
Well, at the beginning, or in the introductory part of your paper, you made a very bold statement of, you know, that this argument was that, you know, because the systematic theological treatises of the Orthodox Lutheran theologians were very difficult to understand and were incomprehensible for the broader audiences. That was part of that was the reason why the Pietists, to some extent, decided to use certain metaphors in different genres to spread the ideas about their concept of renewal. Am I right? By rephrasing what you said, more or less.
Yes, yes,
okay.
I would say.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. And this remark or the question was about whether it is not really, to a certain extent, just a question of a genre. Because if you look at, you know, the hymnals of the late 16th century and to the environment of the mainstream Lutheranism or Orthodox Lutheranism, if you wish, maybe you can find, you know, very similar vocabulary, which serves different kind of messages for the broader audience. So this was just a question about this, you know, distinction that perhaps it's a bit unfair to put into contrast very specialized theological treatises on one side, identified with the orthodoxy, and the Pietist hymnals on the other side, because these two genres are, completely different, directed on a different audience. And so I'm just asking whether whether we cannot arrive to the conclusion that the Orthodox Lutherans used the very same metaphors to support their ideas, their concepts, in a very same way as the Pietists in the genres which we can compare, actually. So this was the point.
Yes, so I would agree that this development of the confession would be somehow comparable with development of the language, but I think it's well, those metaphors is just one aspect, and I guess well, for Orthodox that would be enough to say, and this is something that we can find in confessional writings from actually this time of Orthodoxy, that we get reborn through the grace of God, and yes, and that's all what we find there. Pietists would indeed use the metaphors that I have presented, but at the same time, in some writings, they would, for example, explain what does it mean, how do we feel that suddenly we feel that it feels somehow nice to do what God is telling to us. So they are describing whole situations, and I guess that well, that's actually this the criteria of this a problem with figuring out the criteria of who was actually a pietist and who not. As I have mentioned, it's extremely hard to define this movement. That was also the reason of why I have chosen Freilighausen, and he is officially acknowledged as an adherent of pietism. So I would say when we see that Pietists, they write for the people, they publish some instructions, they try to struggle with the language to explain what is meant in their systematic writings. And at the same time, there's Freilighausen, who is searching for hymns that would somehow help them to learn the people about it, because well, as I said, it's easy to say, oh, we can get reborn. This is actually what we find literally in the form of concord, but it doesn't bring us further, as we want to know what does it really mean. So I guess that was just a kind of teamwork by different pietists, but I think that this question just helps to envision that it's extremely hard to draw a line between what is pietist and what is not pietist. So from that point of view, I would indeed, I would say, yes, that's the problem. And it's not easy to say, oh, yes, we can draw a line and make this differentiation. Here, I would agree. If it's okay, then I would say something to the first question.
Yes, that's
concerning
fine.
those natural sciences. I haven't found anything, and I think it was not very interesting for the pietists. It may be that I may be wrong because I don't know everything, but it was the God's law that that established the framework of pietist discourses. So the goal was to figure out of what God wants us to do, and actually, yes, it's important to learn what moral premises can we discover. That's the point, and not if we can somehow evaluate if the gravity power or something like that, if it's real or not. A little bit later, pietists started to discuss such metaphysical questions, because they started to discuss with philosophers, and yes, that could be a proof that they could do it. But I would say for them it was mostly this ethical and practical theology of what was so interesting. But it may be that there's something that I just haven't found, and that there's something that I don't know. So from my, as far as I know, I would say, I would answer the question this way.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering about, improvement of cognitive abilities, whether the cognitive abilities are understood just in this narrow perspective of the ethical improvement, or whether there are broader consequences.
Thank
okay.
you.
Actually, I have greetings from Petr Pavlas, who excuses himself because he had to leave the institute, and he expected he would be able to join us from the train, actually, but Wi-Fi in the train didn't work. But he was so nice to send SMS messages to two questions for our today's speakers. So I'll try to open my prehistorical phone and read his two questions. First is for Tomáš. Can you please tell more about the encyclopedical aspect of the labyrinth of the world and paradise of the heart? This is the first question for Tomáš. And the second question of Petr for Anna, to Anna. The strict exclusivist opposition between the metaphors of renewal in Pietism, for example, there is no middle between sleep and being awake, light and darkness, sickness and illness, etc., can be juxtaposed with the Enlightenment rhetoric of light and darkness, reason and delusion, science and superstition. Yes or not? This radical tertium non datur, as it seems to me, is another parallel of both movements and social intellectual programs, isn't it? So, first, Tomáš.
Just very briefly, I think I'm absolutely sure that Comenius uses the encyclopedic style of description of the world, and as continuation of his previous works, especially Amphitheatrum, Universitatis Rerum, and so on, as a description of corrupted world. He uses pilgrim path as a way from one stage to the another, and show some nomenclature using chapters for description of encyclopedic chapters of real nomenclature in his archetypal view and in his real view. So this is, as I said, the dystopic encyclopedia of corrupted world. In fact, that in Amphitheatrum Universitatis Rerum, he wanted to describe a harmonic world. So after a few years after this work, he renewed his attitudes to the world and described the world in a very similar way, but as a dystopic, corrupted world. The using of nomenclature encyclopedic strategy is, in my opinion, very evident, and we must pay attention on the first version of Labyrinth, where this strategy is absolutely clear. All supplements from Polish and Netherlands prints added very literary, well constructed passages, but it disrupted previous encyclopedic form of the work, in my opinion. But I think I'm sure that is clearly evident.
Okay, thank you. And Anna?
So I think it's very interesting that Petr wanted me to answer yes or no. So it's like, yeah, I would have some questions to him, and he's not here. Yeah, so my answer would be why not? Because yes, maybe there would be indeed some parallel, but I guess that his formulation of the question was quite general. So I can imagine that there are some additional questions emerging. What is really meant? But I wouldn't exclude this possibility. So that would be my answer.
Okay, let's leave it for Petr to write you an email, perhaps. And
yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. There is one more comment by Iveta, actually by several participants who had to leave already. Iveta, this is probably to the previous stage of our discussion. She left a message: they Pietists took it seriously, applicative hermeneutics. Okay. And perhaps if I may, if there is no other question or comment, I may ask Tomáš now to show those pictures which you wanted to show us. Microphone, you have a muted microphone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vladimir. I'm very sorry for the technical problems during my presentation. I want to show you how these two slides should look, but it's just a very short remark to my previous paper. This is the part extracted from the drawing of the manuscript of Labyrinth, and this is a comparison with classical one-way Labyrinth. But I want to show you my illustration of emblematic books, because it is also, I think, remark to paper by Anna, because it show very soft and fluent boundaries between confession. This emblematic book, as I mentioned, is in fact previously Jesuit. It firstly published in 1586, and it was really Jesuit emblematic book with a lot, I think 18 engravings depicting the child Christ who illuminated, cleansing, and repairing the heart of the soul. After a few years, this book was very broadly known, not only for Jesuits or Roman Catholics, but also for Lutherans as well as for Pietists. I want to show you a very important example of this handwritten version of the Cor Jesu Amantis Sacrum, with handwritten remarks and poems by Jan Swammerdam, who was a very close friend of Antoinette Bourignon, which make a very close connection to Comenius himself. So in my opinion, this multi-confessional book of emblems show very fluent and soft boundaries between confession, not only in Protestant milieu, but also between Roman Catholics and Protestants. Thank you very much for this possibility.
Thank you, Tomáš, for this addition to your paper. Well, I'm not sure if there is any other comment or question. If not, thank you very much once again for participating in this seminar series. Thanks to both today's speakers. As Anna has mentioned, we will see each other in September, I believe. In the meantime, of course, we will be in touch. We will send you a couple of emails starting with the next week, and we will, of course, put together revised program of our September conference. So what else? Thank you, Tomáš, for backing our online seminars, recording them and streaming them. And I'm sorry for today's technical problems, of course. We will keep in touch. So I hope the seminar was of some use because of the feedback given to the speakers, and I think also that some presenters signaled to us that they will, they will react in the written versions of their papers to what they heard in the discussion, and of course we will also send some further remarks which may be used by the authors of individual papers for delivering, the mature versions of those papers. Okay, so thank you once again. See you in September. Some of you, others are colleagues from the Institute, so we will see earlier than in September. That's all for today.
Ano. Děkuju, nashledanou.
Taky
Bye bye.
děkuji.
Goodbye.
Oh, bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, Martin.
Yes, bye.
Bye, Anna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.